Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. The United States says it will beef up its forces in Saudi Arabia in the wake of the attacks on kingdom's oil infrastructure. Earlier, President Trump said a military strike against Iran is always a possibility. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper told reporters in Washington the fresh deployment will be defensive in nature. Esper says the troops are being sent at Saudi Arabia's request. He says the U.S. will speed up delivery of the military equipment to Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
We're calling on many other countries who would also have these capabilities to do two things. First of all, stand up and condemn these attacks. And secondly, look to also contribute defensive capabilities.
Yemen's Houthi rebels say they plan to halt attacks in Saudi Arabia. Leading Houthi official Mahdi al-Mashad says the gesture is meant to bring about peace talks with the Saudis. Al-Mashad expressed hope the Saudis will respond positively to the signal. He says Houthis will stop aiming missile and drone attacks at the kingdom. He also warned continuing the war can lead to dangerous developments. Al-Mashad called for Yemen's warring parties to hold negotiations for a national reconciliation. U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to release ISIS prisoners at European borders if France, Germany and other countries don't take back their captured nationals. Speaking to reporters at the Oval Office, Trump said the U.S. can't spend billions of dollars housing prisoners at Guantanamo Bay. Thousands of captured ISIS fighters are being held in camps in Syria. Most of the EU countries have refused to take back prisoners after the US declared victory against ISIS militants in March. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has left for the US to attend a 74th UN General Assembly session. Pakistan's permanent ambassador to the UN, Maliha Lodi, said PM Khan will raise the Kashmir issue at the session on September the 27th. In a statement, Foreign Office said the Premier will hold bilateral meetings with his counterparts of several countries. The statement said Prime Minister Imran Khan will also attend UN summits on climate change, sustainable development and health coverage. PM Khan will meet US President Donald Trump on Monday. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Pakistan stands by the Kashmiris in their freedom struggle from India. Talking to Indian Muslims in Medina, Qureshi said Pakistan will fight the Kashmir case at the United Nations General Assembly. A youngster from Kashmir told Qureshi that he's not being allowed to contact his family in occupied Kashmir. He said he does not know about the well-being of his loved ones since India imposed curfew on August the 5th. The international community has repeatedly asked New Delhi to end the lockdown under UN resolutions, which enters 48th day in the occupied valley. Azad Jammu and Kashmir President Masood Khan says the world has recognized the ongoing crisis in Indian occupied Kashmir. Speaking at the Kashmir Youth Convention in Islamabad, Masood Khan said India's lockdown cannot suppress the voice of the Kashmiris. More in this report.
Speaking at the Kashmir Youth Convention in Islamabad, Masood Khan said India's lockdown cannot suppress the voice of the Kashmiris. Criticizing the illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir, he paid rich tribute to the brave Kashmiris for standing up to Indian oppression.
Kashmir will become a graveyard of over 900,000 Indian occupation forces. We have fought here and will continue to fight. We will win our freedom. No power can deprive us of our rights.
Speaking at the convention, Mishal Malik, wife of detained Kashmiri leader Yasin Malik, said Kashmiri youth are guarding freedom movement.
And little girls, teenagers, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls in uniform with their bags, they come out on the roads and they protest, which has never ever happened in the world's history. that little kids have now taken the command, because our entire leadership, as you know, it's locked up.
Chaudhry Faisal Mushtaq, the head of TMUC and organizer of the convention, said it was important to sensitize young students about the freedom struggle in Kashmir.
The state or the statecraft alone cannot fight narratives and notions. So it's important that we prepare our younger generation to be a champion, advocate, and an ambassador of the Kashmir cause.
The convention was attended by more than 2,200 young students and people from all walks of life.
India's opposition leader Rahul Gandhi says Prime Minister Narendra Modi's rally in Houston will be the world's most expensive event. However, the International Humanitarian Foundation of Houston will also stage a protest against the Modi's government illegal actions in occupied Kashmir. Modi is scheduled to address a public gathering in Houston during his visit to the U.S. In a tweet, Gandhi said no event can hide the economic mess that Modi has created. A day earlier, the Modi government announced big relief to the companies by slashing corporate tax rates. India's GDP growth has slipped to a 6-year low in the last fiscal quarter. Due to continuous economic recession, thousands of workers have been laid off from jobs since April. Kashmiri and Sikh activists will hold anti-India protests in Houston tomorrow during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit. The activists have already conducted a rehearsal decorating vehicles with flags and protest signs. Meanwhile, Indian troops brutally beat civilians in Kupwara during a cordon and search operation yesterday. The Kashmiri media reports that Indian forces ransacked houses, damaged property and harassed civilians. The former Chief Minister of occupied Kashmir, Mehbooba Mufti, has asked India to provide details of detentions since August the 5th. In a letter to Indian government, she sought an answer within 3 days. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani says he will introduce measures to prevent civilian casualties in the war against the militants. He was addressing an election rally in Jalalabad a day after 30 civilians were killed in a U.S. drone strike in Nangarhar province. Ghani said his government took steps to stop night raids and attacks targeting innocent people. But a member of the Nangarhar Provincial Council said Ghani's condemnation of the attack is not enough. He said the president should bring perpetrators of the civilians' killings to justice. According to the UN, over 3,500 civilians have been killed or wounded in the first half of this year. In Egypt, thousands of pro-democracy protesters have taken to the streets of the capital city, Cairo. Demonstrators are demanding President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's resignation over alleged corruption charges. A huge crowd joined the demonstrators around Tahrir Square in Cairo, chanting anti-Sisi slogans. Riot police fired tear gas to disperse the protesters, arresting dozens. The demonstrations came after self-exiled Egyptian businessman Muhammad Ali accused the president of corruption, demanding his overthrow. Al-Sisi has dismissed the allegations, calling them lies. Such demonstrations are rare in Egypt after unauthorized protests were effectively banned in 2013. In Libya, a U.S. airstrike kills 8 suspected ISIS militants in southern Mosul district. The U.S. African Command says it conducted the raid in coordination with the Libyan government. It said ISIS will not be allowed to benefit from the conflict in the country. ISIS militants lost their stronghold in Libya's central town of Sirte in December 2016. Since then, the group has retreated to the country's south. In Palestine, Israeli forces have wounded 74 Palestinians during weekly protests at the Gaza border. Medics say 48 demonstrators have been shot with live rounds. Palestinian officials say Israeli troops also fired tear gas and rubber bullets at the demonstrators. Dozens of protesters fell ill after inhaling tear gas. Israeli forces have killed over 300 Palestinians and wounded about 18,000 others since a weekly protest began in March 2018. Britain's Brexit negotiator Stephen Barclay says a withdrawal deal with the European Union is still possible. After meeting EU's top negotiator Michel Barnier in Brussels, Barclay said the talks are moving in the right direction. He said EU members want to avoid Britain's no-deal exit from the bloc. Barclay said the technical team of both the sides will meet again next week.
Talks will continue next week between the technical teams, and it's important we deliver a deal because that is in the interests of the United Kingdom and indeed in the interests of the European Union as we move forward to a strong future relationship, which is where we all want to go.
In a sad and unfortunate incident from the United States, 4 people have been killed in the western state of Utah after a bus carrying Chinese tourists crashed near the national park. Officials said the vehicle was near Bryce Canyon National Park when it veered off the road and hit a guardrail. Of the 30 people on board, 26 passengers have been taken to hospital with injuries ranging from minor to life-threatening. Authorities are investigating the cause of the crash. Millions of people have marched across the world for an urgent action on climate change. Thousands of school children skipped their classes and workers downed their tools to join the protests as a part of a global climate strike day. 16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg is the face behind the rallies. Details in this report.
As the UN is preparing for a global environmental summit next week, people from all over the world are out on the streets. In Australia, some 300,000 took out rallies calling the government to cut carbon emissions. Thousands of protesters from across Britain arrived in London to make their voices heard. Similar demonstrations are being held in Pakistan, France, New Zealand, South Africa, and other parts of the world. They are calling on governments to take urgent action to curb climate change.
Justice is about ensuring that my children and my children's children and their children have a planet to live on that's healthy, and it means that we don't pollute every day. We stop throwing rubbish out of our motor cars and we start treating the planet as if it's a precious home.
More than 30 nations have signed an Austria-sponsored appeal for greater action to fight climate change. Germany's governing parties also agreed a new €50 billion climate protection package. It includes curbs on carbon emission and more radical steps to save the environment. Environmentalists say the world leaders must take immediate action to limit the harmful effects of man-made climate change.
As a property underwriter, I know the financial worth of climate change. When you talk about Nisna, when you talk about the Durban storms, when you talk about Cyclone Idai in Mozambique, it's not just the lives that are lost, but then the significant infrastructure that has been lost through climate change. And to be able to go forward, not just health-wise, economic-wise, we need to make sure that we take care of our planet.
More demonstrations are planned in New York when the UN will hold a conference on global warming. Swedish activist Greta Thunberg will lead the march to the UN headquarters next week.
Moving on to Spain, which commemorates a 500th anniversary of Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan in the port city of Sanlúcar de Barrameda. Magellan led the country's first circumvention of the globe. 5 centuries ago, a fleet set sail from Spain on a voyage that became country's first ever trip around the world. Spain's King Emperor Charles V backed Ferdinand Magellan after he failed to convince the king of his native Portugal to support his project. Magellan set off with 5 ships and over 200 men to discover a new route to Indonesia's spice-rich Moluccas Island. He was killed in a fight with the indigenous people on the island of Mactan, Philippines in 1521. Spain's Royal Mint has also produced a special edition coin to commemorate the 5th centenary. A controversial exhibition of Third Reich designed is being held in the Netherlands. The organizers claim the exhibition's purpose is to show how Nazi aesthetics pervaded German society between 1933 and 1945. Details in this report.
Extraordinary measures have been taken for the show. Photography is banned and only 50 visitors are allowed to enter at a time. Curious museum goers have been flocking to see the expo. Organisers say the expo shows how National Socialists had an absolute grip over everyday German life.
What you see in this exhibition is how Nazi design permeated every little nook and cranny of society between 1933 and 1945. And that's important to realize how that process of seduction worked and what role design played in that.
A 1940s Volkswagen Beetle, a statue of Hitler's favourite sculpture, posters and films are among 277 articles on display.
The exhibition shows that brutal terror can be disguised in strong, powerful symbols and designs. There must be space for such an exhibition in the world of today, because it has a very powerful message that terror can be in a beautiful disguise.
The exhibition covers 2 floors and runs till the 19th of January 2020.
In the United Kingdom, mudlarks have been scouring the shores of the River Thames in London to unearth the historical items. Let's see how one woman collects metal pins, century-old coins and clay pipes. They still bear the maker's fingerprints.
On the banks of the River Thames, Laura Micklem is looking for treasure. She is out mudlarking, scavenging for items of value long hidden in the riverbed. Mudlarks have scoured the foreshore of London's river for centuries, searching out lost or discarded items to sell. And the tradition lives on today in a small band of devotees like Laura.
For me, it's not about finding things of that are worth lots of money. It's just that feeling of picking something up and being the first person to hold it, or find something that almost changed history because no one's ever found anything like that.
The practice is highly regulated, and mudlarks need a license from the Port of London Authority. Anything of archaeological interest must be declared. But for Laura, the joy is in the more commonplace finds, like this 6-pence coin. Laura and other mudlarks work with museums to help identify and preserve their finds. Some are on display at this exhibition at the Museum of London Docklands. Its aim to reveal the secrets of London's historic waterways.
The Thames is the city's longest archaeological site, but it is vulnerable, it is fragile, and the mudlarks do excellent work at recording and helping to save that information.
Many of the rivers, streams and brooks that cut through London have been built over and lost, but the Thames remains at its heart. Its tidal waters still leave evidence of centuries of life, work and death on the shore, sparking the interest of many determined to uncover the secrets it still holds.
And now the birds are disappearing at an alarming rate in the United States and Canada. There has been a 29% population drop since 1970 and a net loss of about 2.9 billion birds. More in this alarming report.
Environmental degradation has caused drastic habitat loss, especially for birds. The intensification of agriculture and land use changes are placing pressure on bird populations. Each of the 12 bird families have lost more than 50 million individuals in the US and Canada.
What we found was staggering, it was depressing, that there was a decline in over 29% of birds, 3 billion birds lost over those 50 years.
While climate change was not the major driver of the population plunge, it is likely to exacerbate threats to bird populations in the future, researchers said. They said the extinction of the passenger pigeon in the early 20th century shows that even abundant species can go extinct rapidly.
The good news is that nature is resilient once given a chance. So if we as humans act on this, if we start to really value nature, value birds, put policies into place that are going to protect these animals that we share in our common home, that these birds will respond. They'll respond rapidly. In 5 or 10 years, we could easily see some of these species starting to increase. It can happen that fast.
However, banning the pesticide DDT has allowed for the resurgence of raptor populations, including the bald eagle. So there might be a solution to this endemic after all.
Lows and the highs of the business world now. After 2 days of trade talks in Washington, the U.S. has lifted punitive tariffs on over 400 Chinese products. Both Washington and Beijing say progress was made in the deputy-level dialogue. The 437 exempted Chinese products range from printed circuit boards to laminated wood flooring. During the talks, the U.S. officials pressed China to substantially increase its purchases of American soybeans and other farm commodities. But Trump told reporters agricultural purchases are not enough to seal a trade deal.
We're looking for a complete deal. I'm not looking for a partial deal. China has been starting to buy our agricultural product, if you noticed, over the last week, and actually some very big purchases. But that's not what I'm looking for. We're looking for the big deal.
The trade talks between the senior officials from the world's two largest economies are scheduled to take place in the middle of next month. Now moving on to India, which has cut its corporate tax rates in a bid to boost economic growth. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said the duties will be lowered on 22% from 30%. India's economic growth is sitting at a 6-year low as the government failed to boost spending and shore up investment. So far this year, India's central bank has cut rates 4 times and the benchmark rate currently stands at a near-decade low. The country has relied on domestic consumption to fuel growth, but spending has slowed sharply. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. Thank you for watching. Further updates, stay tuned to Indus News.